Hey, morning, Tim.
Hey, Robbie. Hey, Joey. Oh, look, it's the old group.
Hello, Tim.
Hey, guys. We'll get started in about one more minute, and then we'll just move on here.
For a moment, I felt like it's an Oran meeting.
Yeah, that's what I said. It's same clowns, different circus.
Yeah. Hi, everyone.
I could say that because I'm one of the clowns. So. Hey, Robbie, are you audible? Just want to make sure.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay,
just being sure.
sure.
All right, let's just get started real quick here. So this is the November 1st ORAN integration meeting. So we have some agenda items for today. One, we're going to go through the previous minutes real quick and note if there's anything that changed on that or and try to get approval from the group. What we'll also do is we're going to continue that discussion on the ORAN architecture. What we said last meeting was we needed to come to some consensus on this. So that's a good thing because I think we're converging quite well on the discussion, and I would encourage the group to use that ORAN discussion channel on the Slack as well as these the drive information as you've been doing, because I think we don't have a lot of meetings and we only do one meeting. We probably have 3 meeting sessions before we have to get back to the network architecture team with our identification of our use cases and everything else. So using that channel does help. Speaking of that, there are some release 3 dates that we talked about that we have to come to some consensus with today. What is the date we're going to go back to the network architecture team with this type of information, as well as what date are we going to say to the network automation team that will have the information that they need for whatever enablers that they want to develop for release 3. So we do need to spend some time today on that and get an agreement from the group on it. I put in the example dates, one that I got from WIM and the other is just backing up trying to meet WIM's date, the January 31st. And then I want to show what the network architecture is asking for us to put into their agenda. So it'll be 5 minutes just to figure out, giving them the status of what we're trying to do. And then there was some stuff that came out of the week that people want to request the Seishu and Alexis, who's doing some of the SMO, IMS, and DMS interactions with OSC. And some studies that they're doing in ORAN. What they've done, there was a request to have that information fed back, as well as Sagar requested some information to be fed back, but he's not available today, so we're going to schedule that for a later date, probably November 8th when he has time. So that's what we have today, and I don't think we're going to get to it, but we'll eventually have to begin discussions once we have the architecture set. Begin some discussions on some of the objectives that we want to do and the user stories behind release 3. Does anyone else have any other agenda items for today? Okay, and I try to keep these rolling agenda items, guys. So as they go through and we're able to schedule them, I'll try to keep them in there. Okay, so again, this is the minutes from the previous meeting. I just ask at this point, I don't try to go through them all, but I would just ask, does anyone have any comments on it that they feel that they have needed change that wasn't reflected correctly? If not, I'd ask for approval. I'll just quickly scroll through them. Okay, so does anyone object to approval of the minutes then from that? All right, hearing none, I'll just mark those approved. and then we come up to today, right? And so again, where we left this was we were talked about the integration.
Hey, Tim, we have one
yeah.
raised hand.
Oh, sorry,
Yeah.
I didn't see it.
I mean,
Yes,
no
go ahead.
objection.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Go
No
ahead.
objection to any of this meeting minutes, but I like it. I like
Okay.
the fact that you're asking people for review and approval. This is a cool practice. Thank you.
All right, sure, no worries. All right, so it just keeps me honest, to be honest with you. All right, and so what we have been discussing and what we said what we have to do before we get into the objectives and the user stories is that we have to come to consensus with this integration architecture. So hidden somewhere in here is the integration architecture that we've been discussing. We started it with Robbie provided an integration architecture that he had, and silly me, I was just trying to get some room here to show this in the integration architecture that what it would look like, but then we started having discussions here. So we're going to complete these discussions. So Robbie, I think where we're at right now is what I suggested was we started with this diagram where we have the Nefio orchestration function as well as the FOCOM service producers and the NFO service producers. And we were trying to figure out how all that looked with respect to the SMO services and the RAN domain management, right? And you suggested looking at that, and I think you had some concerns why you did this. I'm sorry. So I then came back and looked at, said, okay, if you look at functions, the way that they're defining functions in the decoupled SMO, we could actually have a function called, and they have identified this function, by the way, in the decoupled CR, called the ORMA. It's the, I forget what it all stands for, the Orchestration RAN Management or Management Orchestration. Anyway, there's an acronym I think I put in here. Yeah, it's called the Cloud Resource Management and Orchestration function, right? And so what they did was they were combining these two service producers of the NFO and the FOCOM into a single function, because if you look at the service-based architecture, what ORAN is doing is that they're defining services. They're defining services that can be attributed to network function orchestration, services that can be attributed to FOCOM, which is the Federation Orchestra. I don't know, it's got an acronym. And so what they said was that they need to have any services themselves has to have a real thing that is the producer and consumer of the services. Particularly the producer of the service is what we're talking about. And they call those functions, right? So that's why they call them, they don't have ERs, they don't have an orchestrator, they have a function that is the real thing that backs them up. And that's why I kind of keep trying to change this to Nefio orchestration. It's the Nefio orchestrator, right? And so there's functions that are produced as these services. And what I did is I said, oh, well, there's actually a function that the SMO has already defined or as a possible solution that'll ease our burden. And we could actually combine the functions, the sub-functions of the Nefio orchestration function, as well as the NFO service producer function and the FOCOM service producer function, along with any other behaviors that they have. And we can combine that into this ORMO function, and it allows for the exposure, the production of the FOCOM and NFO services, and it also allows for the exposure of the O2 IMS and DMS function. Okay, so that was the reason behind that. And so I just want to make sure everyone is clear if there are any questions on the difference between a service and a function, which is a service producer. And what Nefio, or not Nefio, ORAN is going to specify are the services. Okay. Alexis, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Tim. My question is the following, because I'm not familiar with these function or these services as part of the SMO decomposition. Is ORMO a black box in the eyes of the SMO, or does it know that in ORMO there is a FOCOM and an NFO component? The reason I'm asking it, yeah.
Okay. So any function, right, is responsible for announcing what services it implements. Okay, so in this case, the OMO would say, hey, I implement the FOCOM services and the NFO services, right? And then the rest of the service guy says, oh, that's a service producer. I can consume services from them. So you could have the SO can consume services then from OMO, right? So it's responsible, any function is responsible for uh, uh, doing a couple basic things, announcing their services and also interacting with what they call the data management exposure, exposing the repositories of that stuff. I didn't think why I put this as ORMO was I didn't think the Nepio orchestration, those enablers that we're building down there, we would want to make a full right function in itself that would have to expose services and interact with the DME. So I kept it under what they called it ORMO. Did that answer your question, Alexis?
Yes, it does. And thank you. And so my follow-up comments, and I think this is where we were having a lot of debate, is in my view, the infrastructure cluster controllers are a component of FOCOM, and the deployment controllers are a component of NFO. So I'm absolutely fine if we have that ORMO box or function that talks southbound O2 to the cloud, because I think then we're fully ORAN compliant. And the reason I'm bringing that up now is because I know this is where we've been having some discussions. So the way it's depicted right now, I'm very fine with it. But this is where I want to open up that for Ravi, right, to better understand how he's viewing that interaction with the O cloud, if not going from an SMO through O2 and through basically some other means that he qualified, I think, the Nepio API. So Ravi, that's really what I would like to.
Yeah.
Teeing up Ravi. Good
Yeah,
job, Alexis.
so this is okay. I think there were like a few points of kind of alignment that was required, right? So I think in the previous picture we started off with putting everything that's Nephew under OCloud. So that's when I was trying to say that hey, OCloud could actually go to the granularity of a cell site or to an edge or regional and all that said. So that you don't have actually a management and an FO management system sitting at that level. It is at the level of SMO. So at least we are aligned there right now. So we see the FO orchestration is pretty much at the level of the SMO. So so in that sense, you're looking at Nepio orchestration as that particular function as a global kind of a system, as a global controller of sorts, right? So the kind of APIs that it's going to expose to SMO would be far richer than what an O2 does, right? In a normal sense. So basically, when you're saying that, okay, SMO wants to control no cloud, all those functionalities, the O2 IMS, O2 DMS functions would be scoped within that single O cloud instance, which is very much close to a realization of O cloud, right? Of physical resource. It's not at the global level. So in that sense, so that was one of the views, or basically the functions that I wanted to say that Nepio orchestration would be exposing to FOCOM. At the same time, I didn't want to I wanted to show a clear demarcation between the two architectures, because somebody looking at from the ORAN end should not view this as saying that, okay, to implement an O2 IMS, O2 DMS, you have to go to a Nepio orchestration layer. That's why if you look into my next figure, I say that if you just go to the next figure, Tim. I still put that, there is, and from the SMO, I demarcate, where ORAN kind of ends and where Nepio begins by saying that, okay, all these functions are within the purview of ORAN. It will evolve as it's supposed to. And the SMO could still control the O clouds using the O2 IMS, O2 DMS function. That's a dotted line. But alternately, then the FOCOM and NFO can also use all the native declarative APIs that Nepio APIs offer. So this is, again, I was trying to say, even with what Tim was bringing on, right? Deploying from an operational perspective, these systems might all be sitting at one place talking to each other, but the APIs and and the different versions of APIs that FOCOM and NFO would consume would be entirely dictated by what Nephew APIs offer. I see it as very much similar to your O2 DMS, HC profiles, or KTS profile. We pretty much say there's a different body of people who are developing this, and that you're consuming it. That's how I see Nephew APIs as.
Okay.
That's
so
why I was trying to show that kind of demarcation, and not necessarily, it will not be at the level of, it will be much richer than what normal O2 IMS or DMS does.
Go ahead, Alexis.
Yes, so my quick reaction to this is really, it looks like, so slide 6, where we look, I'm sorry, Tim, I know you're jumping slides, but so where we see the Nephew APIs here, I don't disagree with this. I mean, this is Nephew's goal, right?
Yes.
That FOCOM and NFO will probably interact with a Nephew management cluster or domain orchestrator. The name doesn't matter much, I believe. And that southbound, they will talk to a cloud. So I agree with that. But if we look at slide 5, then it becomes more of an implementation detail of how FOCOM and NFO are realized. So it could very much be the Nephew APIs, and I think this is pretty much depicted without calling it the Nephew APIs. But it could be also whatever proprietary means that you have. So you don't, it depends the type of strategy we want to have. Do we want to say that we somewhat request that FOCOM and NFO talks to the Nephew API within a Nephew architecture, and it could be fine, or we leave that to interpretation as part of that ORMO box? Now,
the reason why I'm saying is that it's because people looking at it from the ORAN perspective should not see this as a dependency. So that's why it is purely from an architectural kind of cleanliness perspective that it's good to separate out the two things. I mean, it's a may use thing. I mean, FOCOM and NFO can use it, may not use it. It can directly control the cloud.
And that's why I put it in here, right? So just to note it, because you can, if you look at the diagram, if you notice the termination is on the ORMO, not on the Nephew orchestration. So there's got to be something within the ORMO function that determines for a particular OCloud instance that it's going to use the Nephew orchestration function to do the termination or not, right? And so that's what I thought that depicted it well. It fit that same concept. But I got 3 hands up, so let's Wim. I guess Wim, you're first. I guess the hands come up.
No, Bala is first.
Okay.
Bala's first, I think.
I was just looking at the line. So
no, Bala's first.
Go ahead, Bala.
Yeah. Thank you. So one of the things I'm trying to slightly difficult time wrapping my head around is obviously it's a bigger scope we are talking about. We are talking about Nephew playing a role as SMO, Nephew playing a role as cloud, all those things. At the same time, we also need to understand the fundamental principles of Nephew, how it's being built, such as configuration as data, everything is a CRD, things like that. So in this diagram, if we think this is gonna act in SMO, a component of SMO, let's say. So are we saying that Nephew is gonna implement those southbound REST APIs to the cloud? Because
it will be
because that is not how it wants to operate.
I think that's how we. I mean, that is the picture that is there. Even that's why I was referring to that Nephew, which basically says, I mean, the Nephew would kind of have native open APIs to any service orchestrator that wants to consume it, right? And for me, when I say those APIs they're just based on specific use cases you want. Like I would say, it could be a topology CR we have been talking about. It could be kind of related to inventory management or network function deployment or anything, right? So
But the thing is, the SMO, it's very clear. For example, any ORAN compliant component, they need to adhere to certain southbound standards. For example, it has to talk in O2 IMS or O2 DMS, or if it wants to
Yes,
talk
exactly. It is.
move on.
So that is where, that's why I said in the figure 6, I clearly say that OCOM has an option, NFO has the option to basically control the O clouds directly. That's vanilla kind of ORAN, or it could use the kind of the more complex and the rich APIs that Nefio offers, because then you offload a lot of the automation to Nefio domain orchestrator and use those APIs or CRs that it's going to expose. And this will be very specific to, this could be generic ones, like, that we might have probably, or it could be kind of VRAN specific ones. And what we have been developing, right? Because there's been discussion within FEO that a lot of it has to be generalized, consumable. But I see some things like accelerator or timing synchronization. These kind of management functions could be very specific to VRAN.
So, but let's be very careful, right? I just wanted, again, I think Lexus put it in the chat, right? Is that from the O2 IMS standard interface, right? Even in the current TR, what the TR exposed was said, hey, look, we can do provisioning of clusters using Kubernetes, but then for other services like inventory and vault, maybe performance, those types of services to the SMO really are best used the RESTful interface. So this point is, I don't care what gets put up, whether it's RESTful or Kubernetes, ultimately what gets decided. But the fact of the matter is that the architecture has to, and I think Robbie was saying the same thing, has to account for both RESTful interfaces to the OCloud as well as the Kubernetes native interfaces themselves. And so that's what we're trying to depict here. What I was trying to depict here, the way that gets depicted, is simply that the ORMO terminates the interfaces. And so you can do RESTful, you can do K8S, the way Robbie had shown it here, and I have a problem with this particular interface here because it doesn't come off of that. We'd have to come off of this somehow. But
yeah,
was trying to show the same
this.
thing, right?
Yeah, it's messy with this slide thing. Like
all right.
Google.
So let's get some other opinions here, guys. So again, we've got about 15 minutes. So
yeah, just to comment on that, what you said, Tim. So
yeah.
It'll be so what we are developing within the O2 IMS, the K8S profile. The difference would be that you're basically doing everything in the context of a single cloud instance. But since the domain orchestrator sits at a global level, you could do kind of more powerful intent-based APIs to create multiple clusters across multiple clouds, and using all the package variant set, package variant, everything that the platform, Nefio platform offers, right? So it'll be more expressive in that sense. So that will be the major difference.
Yeah. So you have some more flexibility because you're doing the adaptation and translation.
And also because you're sitting at the global level, at the same SML level. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Okay. All right. So I think was Wim next. So Bala, if you guys can put your hands down when you're done, because I'm just going by the hands.
Actually,
Bala,
I put my hand down, but I have some more questions, but we can discuss it later. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's get Wim and Joseph and Joey. And
yeah.
We got a lot.
So I have a bit of a different view on these pictures, by the way. I've been digging a little bit into it. Here is my view of the situation. Nefio is a domain orchestration, right? For run, core, and potentially transport or whatever else that we depicted, right? SMO is a domain orchestration for run, focus on run, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So what it means at the end of the day, in my view, is that if we have to comply to ORAN, we have to comply to the SMO, so to the component, right? But we will do implementations, or we or whomever, that would be an implementation using the Nefio principles. So in other words, there is no, let's say, mediation towards Nephew. There is basically an IMS and a DMS that uses Nephew. And there is no such thing as, basically there would be an implementation of these interfaces using Nephew principles. And that's what we should be focused upon. And with the goal to prove that this is the most flexible way of going down this path. So in other words, what I'm trying to depict is that you take the components of ORAN and you make basically a Nephew variation of them.
So that is where we were
that's
also
where-
discussing. So I just quickly respond to him. So that's where we were also kind of discussing in the sense that because the way it is defined is, the O2 IMS, O2 DMS is working at no cloud level, right? And the O cloud level could go at the granularity of, as I said, it could go to a cell site too, right? So, and domain orchestrator is something sitting at the global level, at the SMO level. And the goal has always been to do automation at scale, right? So you want to manage multiple O clouds instances or multiple network function deployments across multiple hierarchy of O clouds, with simple kind of, or basically with some declarative intents. So to say that you want to use Nephew to implement these interfaces would be kind of relegating it to kind of that, to the one sitting at the far north and one sitting at far south. It doesn't make at least sense to me from what Nephew domain orchestrator kind of tries to achieve. So
so Ravi, I said it before, right? I mean, you are still depicting a management cluster and a single one, right? I'm depicting it. If we have to do something differently, we can have multiple layers of hierarchy in this space. So in other words, there's nothing for me in my mind that limits us to build, let's say, an intermediate layer that does the orchestration across a subset of the systems, nor have we constraints with the fact that there will be a cloud that manages a radio unit remotely. I mean, that's perfectly possible.
Yeah, that's where the domain orchestrator comes in. I mean, we are not, this just goes to the basic high level vision of Nephew. I think that's what it is.
Yeah, what I'm trying to get to is the following. If you try to take, let's say, architecture from ORAN, we have to make it Nephew specific. And that's my comment, right? So in other words, you will have instantiation of each of these bubbles that are going to be Nephew specific. Because otherwise what you'll end up doing, because if you look to IMS and DMS, they are basically either the same way as we do in Nephew or another way, but you're not going to deploy the other way on Nephew because then you're going to have a mismatch of multiple things together, and that's probably architecturally not a good thing to do and operationally not a good thing to do. So that's why I'm making the comment of the fact that, okay, if you do this within Nephew, you're going to follow the Nephew principles within each of these components. So so that's my view of this.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was getting to, Wim. I mean, even if we do that, that means we may not be implementing certain interfaces that ORAN suggests.
Correct, and we might be exposing them northbound in the way that they want, right? But we maybe southbound do it in specific ways, or we have an intermediate layer that does that, right? So that's why
that's closer to this, though, Wim, right? Because again, we got the functions, and these orchestrations
but I would not,
are within
so I would not depict this orchestration layer necessarily. For me, these are all implementing based on Nephew principles, by the way. So that's why for me that
you're just saying we would still just show FOCOM and we would just show it with some
I would put a Nephew bracket or something inside and say that these are the things. Now, just to be clear, most likely we should focus on IMS and DMS first, in my view, because going to the upper layer. But I look at it the following way, guys. We are working on observability, right? And the observability will handle fault management and performance management and tracing and stuff like that. So we are going to have an FCAPS framework that's going to be an alternative to how it's done traditionally, right? And so as a result, you will see that that's why I made the statement from the beginning that we are a domain orchestration. In a domain orchestration, you have to actually support this full FCAPS capabilities. And although we are doing it in a declarative way, we still have to, we will still implement all of these capabilities at some point, right? And that's why I'm saying is that if you map this to Nepio, you need to make these components Nepio compliant.
Okay.
So
All right.
I'll
so
stop there.
okay. So Joseph.
So one question,
Oh.
Wim, I mean,
And
follow
by
up
the
Go
way,
ahead, Bala.
maybe
Or
by the way,
Ravi.
my one more comment, right? We are basically saying, REST interface. Kubernetes is a REST interface, right?
Well, no.
So if you,
But Wim, I want to be clear, right? So again,
yeah.
ORAN has defined a RESTful set of services, actual services.
Okay.
That's not REST, right? It's a RESTful set of services predefined, right? With a set of resources and everything else. And so when
sure,
they
but what I'm trying to say is that we will have, so you map it into KRM, but you could, so it's the same as with Yang, right? So you can map the API towards a KRM model. So you can map the service to it. And to your point in the beginning, like a producer and a consumer is nothing any much different than the consumer is a controller with the API, and the producer is the guy that consumes them and produces them. So you have the same principles in KRM, by the way, exactly the same.
Yes, but I want to be clear, right? Is that the IMS that's exposed, and you have to go look at the study that I think Alexis is leading in ORAN, right? There is a set of services that fault, for example, right? So they've got these things called alarm dictionaries and all this stuff. They have these information models or PM. They've got concepts of PM jobs. That's what an IMS producer, right, of the O2 IMS interface will expose, right?
Yes.
And so as
and
we
just to be
understand
clear, just to be clear, right? So I think maybe, and I think I just saw Alex's note. What I'm not saying is that FCAPS will have to be mapped to CRDs, right? I'm not saying that, but we are going to do an observability framework, right? Which will do fault and performance monitoring, right? Which will expose an interface from that system. That's not going to be, that's not going to be purely KRM, right? So that's going to be a fault and performance management interface to be able to interact with multiple things. So we have to be clear that, so when I talk about KRM, I talk about the configuration side of things, but for fault and performance management, we will have regular consumers that will consume that data.
Yes, but they will be producing what the interface is specified, is what you're saying.
Yes, and most likely
That's
I see it should be flexible that you can plug into any system at the end of the day, right? So it's that we are not tied to a specific implementation.
Okay. All right.
Yeah,
So let's get
on that note,
go ahead.
I just want to add one point on that particular note. Yes, like Tim said, there are RESTful interfaces. I'm getting myself innately familiar with those as well. But at the same time, they are mostly for, at this point of time, they are defined for inventory and monitoring. Those two are at the stage 3 level. So from the monitoring perspective, again, there is a lot of demand. There's a lot of ways that a workload should implement that particular interface. For example, it should allow filtering, it should allow subscriptions, it could allow multiple subscriptions. I'm not sure whether in Nepio we're going to do all this. So long story short, I think we are not saying, hopefully I'm thinking right here. I think we're not saying that we are going to implement either Nepio as either a work cloud or a SMO reference implementation. I hope we are not saying that.
No, because you can never have there's no service context within Nepio orchestration. Yeah. But the key thing is, the idea is that I'm still not getting the picture Wim is trying to say. So how would you modify this picture according to your view, Wim? If you say that, okay, there's no Nepio orchestration sitting at the SMO level, forget about the demarcation. Then it's purely you're just saying that Nepio sits at some functional components within the FOCOM and the IMS. It is simply, you're just using Nepio to kind of as something to implement it. for me, that picture is not clear, but what will be the modification in this picture primarily?
So FOCOM and NFO are basically a set of controllers and maybe event handlers on top of an observability framework that deliver the FOCOM and NFO implementation.
Yeah, so but then
basically you would suck these things, Ben, correct me if I'm wrong, but Wim, was what you're saying, you just suck those, not that.
Yeah, so they will consume that, but the implementation of those components will use that framework, is what I'm trying to say.
And so what will the framework offer? That's the question, right? So if you're saying that it's a domain orchestrator, what would be the function of the domain orchestrator?
So a domain orchestration has, so at the end of the day, so today we have been mainly focused on configuration, right? So we use KRM as a vehicle to do so, right? So that means that you have a KRM-based interface for that. If you look to FCAPS, so then fault performance and tracing, the architecture we are going for is we have a data lake, right? Which basically consumes metric, logging, tracing, and performance monitoring data that can be consumed by various systems, right? Including the controller that does configuration in order to act and do service assurance, or fault or performance monitoring systems.
Yeah, exactly. So you talked about service assurance, you talk about observability. We also do cluster management, and hopefully we are all with NF2 to infra. What you're doing is also kind of doing some kind of homing. You're doing everything that the orchestration does. So what I'm saying is that. Yeah, exactly. So, but then it's doing just more than O2. You can't just put the network orchestration into NFO and FOCOM and say, hey, NFO orchestration in the context of ORAN is simply about O2. No, that's nothing, because we just scoped with O2. We also want O1 to probably be in the picture at some point. So what I'm saying is that.
No. Hang on.
Yes.
I'll stop you there real quick, Ravi. So FOCOM has responsibilities. The FOCOM services have responsibilities for the IAM or for the infrastructure of the cloud. O1 is an application layer element. We may very well have to have some NFO enablement in the RAN NFOAM or in the service orchestration. I think we say that different, right? But to say that I'm going to have O1 coming into some function that's a NFO orchestration function that's going to be associated with FOCOM or NFO, that's way outside the standard.
Yeah, no. What I'm saying is that, see, what I'm trying to say is that you have, the scope right now is O2, but once you get O1 into the picture, then OM needs to be kind of integrated into this.
But it gets integrated up at service orchestration.
Yes. And I'm also not clear how O1 fits right now, because when you say it's service agnostic, I don't know what that means. But O2, okay, makes sense. But what I'm trying to say trying to respond to him is that it's a lot more than just O2. As you said, we deal with the entire lifecycle manager of a cluster. We do probably lifecycle management of inventory. We do lifecycle management of a network function itself. So right. I mean,
but Ravi,
this picture for me, it looks very logical.
Yes, but whether you do more or less, I think we are discussing O-RAN here, right? So whether we do more or less at the end of the day, for me, doesn't really matter at this stage, right? What we are discussing is how does O-RAN fit into NFO, right? Or how does NFO fit into O-RAN? That's what we are. That's
exactly.
That's what we are discussing. So whether we do more or less doesn't matter, right? Less is worse. But so what we should do is say, how do we map these components into an FEO environment, right? That's what we are discussing. As far as I understand.
Wim, hang on. Yeah. Let me ask you to do something, because again, we've only got about 5 more minutes here, right, on this particular topic. Could you do me a favor, Wim? Could you come up onto this thing, make a copy of whatever slide they have, and put what you think it should look like? I think you're just saying you're going to move the controllers up there, but I'm going to let you do that.
No,
could you do that for me?
Yeah, I can do that. Yeah, no problem.
All right, I appreciate it, because that way we can get. I got 3 more that's in line that's been waiting patiently, and Alexis has a question on something. So, Joseph.
Yeah. I was listening to all the conversations. So I think most of the answers are I got, but I think what I'm trying to say here is that architecture of ORAN is fine. I think FOCOM NFO is fine, but I think you're trying to fit the implementation into the the logical architecture. I think that's the problem. I think the confusion that comes in, but I think the idea that everybody is trying to say looks similar. So I feel like what Wim is saying, we might need to show FOCOM. There are certain set of services provided by FOCOM, NFO. So at least some of those services will be provided by NFO, at least to start with, is what I understand. So we might need to show that not as a separate box like it's shown here. Probably we need to like show some parts of the FOCOM is implemented by NFO, some part of NFO is implemented by NFO orchestration. So that's what I maybe we might need to change the picture so that everybody is on the same page. And I think going forward, I think we'll have to see what NFO can provide to the SMO, and slowly it can not implement all the functionalities, but some parts of it. Let's say for NFOM, OAM in the future, some parts of it might be realized using NFO. So slowly,
Exactly.
I think
Yeah.
we need
No,
to show that.
agree with that. Yeah. No, that's a view exactly I had. Like, they should evolve at its own pace. O2 IM, IMS, O2 DMS should evolve within ORAN, NFO APIs. Whether we start with O2 and then extend it to something should be within our
Correct.
control.
So
What use case? So
as
that's the reason I was trying to put that demarcation there to say that these
yeah, but I
APIs
think
would be
the
by
six,
NFO forum, but not by
correct. But if you see in the sixth slide, right? I mean, it looks like it's completely like an outside box. It sits and it might give the wrong idea. That's what I'm trying
No,
to say.
but it is coming from NFO team. That's the reason, right? It's a different
Correct,
forum
correct.
by itself. That's the reason I kind of
true.
separated out. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think we should have the fifth slide and kind of move in or highlight that this functionality of ORAN, some services, we might need to go into the services of what FOCOM provides and highlight these are the requirements that is satisfied by NFO. Let's say 10 requirements of FOCOM are there, 5 of them is done by NFO. There's something like that we need to go to that level and
Well,
clarify.
I don't know how to show that on an architecture document. I can show that
it's
in
not.
text.
I
but
think
not-
we should just highlight for now. Some parts are implemented by.
And
Those
I don't
should be
mind. That's why I've been putting these things here, right? So I
those
don't
should be the
mind.
use cases too. I think
Yeah, it'll get down into use cases. So again, we're just
Yeah, but
trying
if
to
in
get
the architecture, if you show a separate block, it looks like FOCOM is a separate implementation.
Yeah,
And
I
if you
think that
architect-
gets into what Wim is saying. I get you.
Yeah, right, correct. Yeah,
Okay.
that's-
All right. So
yeah.
Joey,
Thanks.
you're next.
Yeah, I won't labor too much because I have very, very similar comments. The slide 6 really confuses me from an ORAN architecture point of view. But the point's been made, like that O2 IMS GMS kind of dotted line on the side doesn't really fit. And then having like this separate NFO domain orchestrator is concerning also, because if you think about the ORAN architecture, the FOCOM to IMS thing is the O2 IMS. There shouldn't be something in between. But if you go back to slide 5, and I think part of the problem is, as has been mentioned, the FOCOM and NFO are just the logical services provided by the SMO. So you can't really have a FOCOM and an NFO box and then some sort of separate NFO orchestration box, because it seems architecturally then you are implementing all of these things and they're different and separate. Where realistically, what you might need to do is have a picture with the ORAN architecture that has the FOCOM and NFO, and then maybe a follow-up picture or something that goes on top of that to show, and this is how
break up FOCOM is what you're saying at a lower layer. Yeah.
Not break up FOCOM, but I wouldn't even have, say, FOCOM and NFO and then the NFO realization in the same picture, because then it seems like they're separate things. Whereas from what I understand, you want realistically the NFO is going to realize the FOCOM and NFO functionality, not be an addition, like a different thing on top.
Yeah, right.
So like when I talk about the FOCOM, the FOCOM talk southbound to the IMS, it's still true if it's a NFO orchestration or it's this infrastructure cluster controller, because that is the realization of the FOCOM. So the FOCOM and NFO are just the logical services that it's providing. They're not separate components as this kind of picture shows. The NFO orchestration is the FOCOM and NFO. When it's the realization of those things. But I think that's kind of been said, and that's kind of what has been done. So I won't labor too much. And if in terms of maybe putting together a picture, I would, I can try as well to maybe capture my thoughts on a picture and share that.
Do this for me, because Wim's doing this, right? Piece of it.
I added slide 7 already.
Yeah, I saw it. So if you could work, Joey, if you could work with Wim on what you think, because I think you guys are going along that same track, right? Okay. So if you could do that, I see Wim's he's going along the same way. Whether it's Ormo or we don't need Ormo at that point if we're getting rid of the if we're removing out the orchestration function. So okay. So I see.
So one question to Joey would be like, if you were to go into that view that 7 has, and if you were to talk to somebody like, if it's an implementation, then what is Nephew's relevance there? I mean, if it's hidden, if those APIs are hidden.
No, I wouldn't say with this picture. I wouldn't say it's Nepheo that's hidden. I would make Nepheo the prominent piece in the picture. It's the Nepheo APIs that you want to show here, and the FOCOM and the NFO is realized by Nepheo, not
exactly. So FOCOM
so it's almost the opposite way around to this picture, and it's the Nepheo APIs that you want to show, and they are realizing the functionality provided by FOCOM and NFO. They're not separate entities.
So that's the whole point I was trying to make. So the whatever APIs that FOCOM and NFO kind of would realize through Nepheo would be nothing to be kind of facing the SMOS, the service bus. It would be only purely towards pointing south towards the managing the hierarchy of folk clouds, right? So because otherwise then you will be kind of contaminating the ORAN thing. You'll go and say that, hey, we have this entire set of APIs that FOCOM is exposing, and then you would have to think about how the other much. So that's why I was trying to clarify that, right? It's FOCOM and NFO who implements it would want to kind of offload this automation into the Nepheo layer, and through the APIs that Nepheo defines. And as I said, this again goes to the higher level architecture that we have in the wiki.nepheo, where you clearly show the demarcation between the service orchestrator and the Nepheo layer. So because otherwise people wouldn't if it's an implementation, then you don't even have to show it. If it's an API, then you have to show where the demarcation is.
So Joey, Wim, Ravi, if you guys could, we're starting with 7. Here we're starting to try to look at the Nepheo enablement of the functions themselves and how to depict that. So if we can work on this in 7, Joey, Wim, Ravi, and come to a consensus with that, I don't have an issue with that as well, right? But I think we need to do that. So it's 2 minutes before the last comment on this one will be Vish, and then we have to go to a different agenda item.
Okay. So I'll try to keep it short. It's not a comment probably on this. It's a generic question I had when we were talking about O Cloud. And when I read up the definition of O Cloud in the ORAN papers, it talks about it being compute, storage, networking, BMC, and BIOS and all that stuff. Does O2IMS talk about any configuring of any of this? Like, I'm interested in BMC and BIOS.
It does, but it does it through a cluster template, right? And so they're just now coming with an ORAN. I'm sorry.
It must be somebody talking on.
I don't know. So my point was that, hey, Alok, I'm gonna mute you, buddy.
Yeah, I forgot.
I don't know if I could. Oh, he muted himself. Good. All right. So my point was that yes, but it's something that's still in hot discussion within ORAN. And there's this concept of templates and infrastructure elements, and so I'm not gonna get into it much, but you can, if you look at it and you got the ORAN site, you can look at this concept of cluster templates and maybe talk to Alexis about it. But I think it'll clarify some of that stuff for you, Vish.
Okay,
There's a
thank you so
notion of
much.
ICS to initial configuration something.
The reason
There's
for
all
that
that stuff
question,
fits into it.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
but the cluster template is the savior.
yeah, the reason for that question is, when we talk about telco workloads, it's all bare metals is what I think in my head, and all this needs to be set up. And if at any point of time, I mean, question for the Nephew folks, would we be getting in there? We know we are saying we're going to be doing infrastructure configuration in Nephew as well, one of the pillars. So is that coming at some point of time in the future is my question that I'm asking out loud. Maybe there's no answer right away.
Yeah, yes, Wish, in Nephew, yes, we will have to deal with it. I probably will reuse the existing. My hope is we will reuse the existing projects / operators that can do that job for us. But I think definitely, I think that will be part of. If we get into the RAN domain, that's something that we need to deal with. But regarding the ORAN stuff, they're not finalized. The finalized stuff is very few APIs at this amount of time. They're mostly around inventory gets and alarm
Yeah,
gets.
we're gonna crawl, walk, run, guys. So right now we're taking and crawling, right? So as ORAN becomes more mature, we'll become more mature in our integration of it, right? So
Thank you.
yeah. All right. So guys, I'm gonna have to cut this off. Again, I think what we've said is that we're trying to come up with a way of exposing the fact that these functions defined by or services defined by the SMO. I think that's the real question at this point. How do we depict that best to show that these are actually Nephioized functionalities that contain the services northbound, right?
So Tim, I'm sorry. I just want Rohit to speak a bit because I want to hear the perspective of a service provider on this one.
Okay, so I got
Hi all, Rohit this side.
3 minutes, Rohit.
Yeah. So one question I have with respect to the low level configuration. I think in the ORAN Alliance, only very little definition is provided with respect to the initial configuration like BMC setting, BIOS configuration. Only one particular topic is there, that is the ICS, the initial configuration set. And apart from that, I think nothing has been defined in the ORAN Alliance for the initial configuration perspective. That's what I would like to understand from the DT perspective, how we are going to handle this in the Nephew, how we are going to handle this BMC settings, firmware upgrade, because the whatever concepts we are discussing these days, for me it is more for the Kubernetes cluster perspective. That is my first question. And second question is why this DMS component is part of both the management and workload clusters.
So there's two questions there. So the first question I can only just say again, within ORAN, they're discussing the
So the first one, I can answer the first question, Tim. So we are working on a concept with NF2 Infra that is going to define a set of KRM, not only for resources in Kubernetes, but also resources to the host, being kernel, BIOS, SRIOV, hardware stuff that you need to configure on the servers.
Right.
So there is a work item ongoing. So it's fairly early days, by the way. So if you're interested, I would welcome your input. But so we are in the process of defining some KRM resources for that, and we would create a first implementation on dealing with that, or use if it's available. Something.
So is it in the Nephew community, NF2 Infra, this project?
Yeah, it's in a different track.
Yeah, it's a different group that we are discussing. So I'm leading it, so that's why I'm bringing it up.
Yeah.
So there is a work. So there is a separate group or task force that is dealing with that aspect. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I think the DMS is only trying to show that it is something that controls the workload cluster.
Yeah, so the DMS is only dealing with deployment. So this is how I'm going to get the ORAN NFs down on and monitor the ORAN NFs, the workloads themselves onto the cluster, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so that was the use cases. All right, so let's go back to the agenda real quick, guys, because I need to get a couple things from you to move this thing along. So again, I'm trying to get a date. So again, what we've said is we will have a high-level architecture the objectives that we're going to do for release 3, and the identification and descriptions of the user stories identified. And we're going to go back to the network architecture team to let them know what we're doing and get agreement, right? And communicate this to them, right? And so the deadline that I tentatively picked because of the deadline that was given to us from the network automation team was December 1st. Now that deadline itself, if you look at the number of days or the number of weeks, I think we only have 3 other times that we can discuss this, right? So my question is that what do we want to do with the date? Do we still think December 1st is a realistic date? If it is, we actually have to come to conclusion, I believe, this week on the high level architectures so we can decide on the objectives and the identifications of the stories. So someone has to give me some guidance of what I tell the network architecture team. Do we think that December 1st is still a valid date?
I do think so. Yeah. I mean, it's probably going to take the next meeting to converge, but I think we're getting there. And then identifying objective and user story, we're going to have probably 3 meetings to do that. So, in my opinion, I think it's achievable.
Does anyone?
The only other thing I would suggest, because right now that deck we only have is a set of diagrams, so we also need some text to explain it. So.
Well, we'll get there. We'll get there. That's why I've been putting those diagrams down to put some text behind it.
We are saying that 1 month is good enough from now to there to get some write up on it. I think we should have some time for that as well, to take feedback and to iterate over that and stuff.
So we're going to give this to. So the way that I looked at this, Robbie, is that this goes to the network architecture team, right? And you can look at. I actually created some seeded some objectives and some identifications, right? And I was using what we had currently up to today. So I tried to seed some of these stories. And the nice thing about the stories are we can rely on some of the ORAN stories that they've already done, the user stories that they've done, the use cases for them, right? So if we don't think it's December 1st, then Robbie, then what's the date?
No. My question is that my only comment was that, we should allocate. So probably another week we can come in alignment with the architecture, but then probably another week for putting some documentation, explaining people exactly what this integration of the 2 architectures mean and what it's trying to achieve.
But we can do that while we're doing the objectives. We can do that while.
Yes, exactly. I just said, okay, there's that item too. That's all. Yeah.
Okay, got it.
I think December 1st is doable.
All right. And so the other one is that what has been requested of us from the network automation team is to have these artifacts, if you will, because this is again what we provided to for release 2, but these types of artifacts to the network architecture team or network automation team for January 31st. So this means that December is kind of dead, guys. Let's be honest, right? You maybe get the first 2 weeks. But then you get the 4 weeks. So basically, you have at most 6 weeks to put together the deployment architectures, give them the blueprints, and you can see examples of what they did for release 2, operators, and then they wanted to add on some APIs that they were doing based upon the use cases. So the question is that good enough? Is that okay with you guys to make that commitment? Gives you about 6 weeks.
I'm a bit confused that our role is to define these things. I think this is more of a joint responsibility between SIG architecture and automation. I mean, to answer your question, I think we can achieve that date, but I'm debating the content of what we need to achieve here.
Oh, well, yeah, the content is quite open. All I did was went through what was documented for release 2, right? And so if there's something that's changed, again, you could go to this is what they discussed in release 2. Sorry, I was just using artifacts from previous releases, right? So this is what it looked like for release 2. They started talking about these deployment blueprints, the operators themselves, and so that's where I took it, right? So you had the architecture mapping, the deployment blueprints, and the operators. So those were the artifacts that I knew of. If there are other ones, I'm open to it. But the question is, do we think January 31st is a date that we can provide that to?
Yeah, I think so. In my view, yes. Probably when you say objectives, so we'll produce the architecture just to summarize, for my own understanding. And the objective is, okay, what are we going to achieve for this R3 timeframe?
Yeah, and I seeded objectives, Bala, right? So if you look at it, what we'll do here, and there's this piece for it that I seeded, and all we're doing is you're saying what we're going to do in release 3, right? So there's objectives that come up. What do you want to see, right?
Yeah.
And then from there you have I just saying programmatic wise, probably need to break this into tracks, right, for people with the specialties. And then I seeded some use cases, right? So from what we want to see, what's a proof of concept, what's not, down to what is it they're going to see when they see a proof of concept, for example, right? And I just added those in based upon some use cases that were there. All that stuff needs to be discussed. So that's what I mean when I say objectives and use cases.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
Thanks. Yeah.
We also on the comment, Tim, I think in the slides that you showed from the tech summit, I don't think O2 was in the scope then. It was everything around the network function orchestration. So I think this would be entirely new piece of work, and that's what I think we wanted to understand.
Well, from release 2, it is. Yeah, you're
yeah.
absolutely right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So for release 3, it is around the O2, right? That's a good point.
Exactly, and then we'll have to come up. This will be entirely new. I don't think this has been discussed earlier, and that's why we wanted Seishu's input on what OSC does or what
That's right.
OAI has in support for O2.
And I do have a request after this, guys. So okay, so it's 11:02. So I'm gonna tell the guys that this is okay, right? For now, we're gonna shoot for this. If there are artifacts that you guys think that you need to have, or WIM's not on, but if from the network automation team, if there's artifacts that you think that is needed, just add it to the list here, and we'll figure out how to do them, right, for the transfer. And again, it has to be done in conjunction. When we did release 2, it was in conjunction. All right. And so I'm going to leave that go because there's a SIG automation meeting. So I'm going to say that we're down to here, that we got down to here. And is there anything else before we close? Okay, I don't hear anything. And just to let you know, I am in conversation with Seishu and Alexa to try to provide some of this information that you need for the OAI and the OSC stuff. So, okay. All right. So I'll see you guys next week then. Talk to you later.
Yeah. Thank you, Tim. Tim, great meeting. Thank you.